good day. Welcome back, everybody. We're doing step 4 and 5 this week. We've hopefully come to lay the foundations with our steps 1, 2, and 3. I have really enjoyed having the discussions with everybody on the supporter platforms. And so, I think it's nice that we can continue to go through this process. Step 4 and 5 shifts perspective quite a bit in terms of the journey. We start looking inward at this moment in time. We start assessing ourselves. We start assessing our own values. We really start to dig deep into some of our misperceptions of what reality has been. So step 4 said we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So up until this point, many of us have made searching and fearless moral inventories of everybody else. Our denial has created psychological kind of defense mechanisms that relied on blame, on making excuses, on justifying our poor choices and actions. Our deep-rooted self-pity as addicts, brought on by having to play this victim role in an attempt to continue with our behavior, has left us with a lifetime of inventories of every single person's mistakes, actions and inactions that we believe has somehow contributed to the failure of our life. Many addicts have really deep-rooted resentments that have fueled our addiction for years. We are not people that like to forgive and let go. Many people in treatment believe that if they forgive somebody that they're relinquishing them from any form of blame. And they think that going down a stage of forgiveness means that they've got to take some kind of responsibility. And unfortunately, addicts don't like to take personal responsibility. So the scary part of step 4, the reason it tells us to be fearlessly searching, is that we honestly need to assess what has happened in our life and who is really to blame. And we need to address and reevaluate our entire version of reality. So it's certainly not an easy step. From a Johara treatment perspective, we put a lot of time and effort into getting the person ready to do a fearless and searching moral inventory of themselves. We have to make sure that the person is in a position to be able to take responsibility and to look at themselves through the same microscope that they've been examining everybody else's behavior. And it is a truly difficult process to go through. Certainly not something that should be rushed. And the guys during step 4 have to pretty much climb into their old personalities, climb into the old scenarios, climb into the old emotions, climb into the old anger. They need to express that from that perspective. And they need to then start to look at themselves from the opposite perspective, where they start to take ownership for contributing to most of the damage and disaster that has happened in their life. Part of this process is dealing also with the shame and the guilt, dealing with victimization, dealing with self-centeredness and self-obsession, also looking at some deep underlying fears. So it's certainly the pinnacle of treatment in my mind. It's the thing we work towards being able to tackle. It is the most important booklet for us to really have a deep dive into every single one of our relationships and resentments in our entire existence. From a supporter perspective, I know many of you like to think that we need to get step 4 done, we need to get this process finished, and a lot of the times we're pushing for step 4. I think it's important to know that if we as a treatment center push a person into step 4 before they're ready, that this step 4 will actually reinforce old patterns, not break them. And so it's a real difficult balancing act to assess whether a person's ready to take on the mammoth task of looking at their own lives, doing a searching and fearless moral inventory of themselves. And yeah, when the guys do go through step 4, they spiral, their emotions go all over the place. We see a regression of old behavior, we see struggling, we see isolation, we see depression, we see anger, we see it all. And that is a healthy reflection to us that the step 4 is being done properly. So what you'll find often is we don't allow visits and we don't allow those things because the person's in an emotional process that we need to kind of get through without any kind of distractions. So for the purpose of the ongoing 12 step for the supporters, this step 4 is also helpful to a degree for you guys. It's not something we advise anybody in recovery to do at the level we do outside the protection of a safe, secured environment. But from a supporter perspective, it may be worth going through a process, and we'll keep it focused entirely on the addiction, of asking a couple of questions. So number 1, who have you as a supporter blamed for this loved one's problems? And you will probably have quite a long list, be it friends, girlfriends, husbands, school teachers, partners, other parents, siblings, abuse, trauma, whatever it is. Who and what have you blamed for your loved one's condition and current state of life? And I think if you start making a list of all of those things, you'll start to see that we need to really look at those situations that we have decided are the root cause or some of the cause or the contributing factor to your loved one's demise. Who in your mind are you holding accountable for this problem? So a little bit more than blaming, there's 1 or 2 or 3 individuals that you obviously hold accountable for this problem. Generally not the loved one in addiction. It's generally either ourselves, which is also flawed, or a parent that could also be problematic, or a wife or a girlfriend. But we generally have as supporters 1 or 2 key individuals who we think if they never entered this situation, if they didn't do what they did, we would never be in this position. And those are serious situations and relationships and scenarios and perceptions that you as a supporter need to unpack to the best of your ability. The third question which you should really look at is what kind of anger/resentment do you hold towards your loved one in addiction? What are all the unmet expectations that you have experienced from this loved one? Now, most supporters at this point get it very wrong because they struggle to put the anger on the loved one and their addiction. They struggle to voice their disappointment. They struggle to even hold negative emotions. So when we look at that first 2 questions of who am I blaming and who am I holding accountable, we often project the anger, we often project the resentment onto those people, and we give the addict a sort of get out of jail free card. Also, what we need to notice when we're doing supporter step 4, we need to really start to pinpoint how much of the narrative of self-pity have we bought into that the addict has been selling us for years. How much of the victim state have we bought into that the addict has been selling us for years? Because remember, supporters, the addict has to blame, the addict has to be victim, the addict has to have justifications and excuses for making the decisions they've made. It's what lets them off the hook in their own mind. And often as supporters, as loved ones, we've heard the stories, we've heard the justifications, we've heard the blame, we've been presented with all of the denial, and we have almost hooked into that storyline. And so as supporters, we need to unravel that storyline. We need to look at the situations. We need to look at the people we blame. We need to understand that there is potentially an entirely different side to the story that we might not even know about. And then we really need to do probably the hardest thing you would ever have to do, and that is to turn the magnifying glass on yourself. As a supporter, you need to start to say, right, which of my other relationships have I impacted negatively? What parts of my behavior and self have contributed to the breakdown of these relationships? What have I done or not done that has contributed to this addiction thing continuing to grow and get out of hand? We really need to start to examine, but from a non-self-hatred perspective, from a non-blame perspective, we need to examine our own moral compass and where that may have gone off track, not just with the addiction but with our other relationships. Like, where has in our life has things started to become negatively affected, and what actions or inactions have I had that have contributed to the breakdown of these relationships and problems. And we start to see, even as supporters, when we start to really look at these questions, is that there's a golden thread in our life. There's a golden thread that has been playing out long before this specific addiction. There have been things within us that have been driving certain decisions, driving certain relations, driving certain actions that have probably been there for as far as we can remember. And so, yeah, when we look at the supporters' golden threads, you got to start looking past this current addiction problem and start looking at your life in its entirety and saying, right, where have I possibly missed the mark? So we then move on to step 5, and it says we admitted to God, to ourselves and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. So when we start processing these step 4s and we start looking at all of the issues that we're looking at our wrongs. We're not looking at other people's wrongs. And when we get to step 5, we start processing step 4 in its entirety. We start to pinpoint and look at the exact nature of what we have done that has contributed to the problems. We start looking at the layers of denial that we have developed to protect ourselves from seeing the exact nature of our wrongs. And like I said, there's usually this golden thread that plays itself out throughout our existence time and time again. Be it misperceptions, be it mismanagement of beliefs, be it behaviors in response to some kind of deficit, be it the inability to listen, be it power and control, be it all sorts of things like we find in our life and the addict's life, that ultimately the substance hasn't been the major problem. The substance has been a symptom of the problem. We find that potentially the addict hasn't even been the major problem, because we as supporters could have taken decisions, different decisions, many different decisions that would have directed this in an entirely different direction. So once we start looking at it in a real deep level, once we start admitting the exact nature of our wrongs, we start to see that there is actually a bigger problem that started years before we even got to this addiction. And this problem has been on repeat and repeat and repeat throughout our life right up until this point. So we see step 1, we admit that we're powerless over our addiction, but we then fast forward to step 5 and we see we admit the exact nature of our wrong. So we're not abdicating all responsibility to addiction. We're actually starting to say, hang on, I'm responsible for my misperceptions. I'm responsible for placing blame on everybody else. I'm responsible for not taking decisive decisions. I'm responsible for all the people pleasing and the inability to say no. I'm responsible for my lack of boundaries. I'm responsible for breakups and breakdowns of relationships. I'm responsible for choosing unhealthy people to be in relationships with. Like, we start to take responsibility for a whole lot of things that we never really wanted to look at. So yeah, I think when we finally get through the processing of step 5, when we finally get through finishing step 4, when we finally get to look at the entire bigger picture, a lot of our delusional denial is broken. We see clearly the pattern that's played out time and time again. We see clearly the flaws in our thinkings and perceptions. We see clearly our flaws in our beliefs and our behaviors and our responses. And once we see that, if this process is done correctly, we can almost never go back into that former state of denial. Once we've seen the denial, once we've seen the psychological defenses, once we've seen the errors in our ways, we won't easily be able to fall for the con of that delusion and denial again. And so step 5 has the ability to turn the entire process on its head. It has the ability to shift an entirely new way of looking at life. And it has an ability to draw a line in the sand and say, right, that was then, going forward, that will never happen again. That only happens if step 4 is done correctly. Step 4 being done correctly is only happening when the person's ready to face themselves. Person's only ready to face themselves when they're acknowledging step 1, 2, and 3. And so, yeah, it's important we get through step 4 and 5. It's the pinnacle of treatment. It's the life-changing point of the 12-step program, and it sets us up for ongoing recovery life after treatment. So yeah, join us on Thursday. We'll unpack this a little bit more. We'll ask a few more difficult questions, and yeah, we will enjoy exploring these steps and these principles together a little bit more. See you then tomorrow at 7. Thank you for listening. Bye.